10 people who confess to murder on their deathbed. Welcome to Odd Occasions, where we dive into the darkest and most perplexing stories in true crime. Today, we're exploring a fascinating and chilling phenomenon: deathbed confessions. For some people, the approach of death brings a powerful urge to finally reveal their most guarded secrets. Whether it was guilt building over decades, or the need to unburden themselves in their final moments. These confessions shed light on mysteries that had haunted communities for years. Join us as we uncover 10 shocking cases of murder confessions, made only when death was near. Number 10. Harvey Richardson. Harvey Richardson seemed like an ordinary man, a retired librarian from Wigan, England, who passed away at the age of 77 in a hospice. His life appeared unremarkable. With no criminal convictions and only a failed librarianship exam in his past, there was nothing to suggest he harbored any dark secrets. But after his death, workmen clearing out his home made a chilling discovery. Tucked away in a suitcase, they found newspaper clippings about a murder nearly 40 years old, an antique pistol, a piece of women's underwear, and a 9-page letter that would change everything. The letter was a full confession to the murder of Lorraine Jacob. Richardson described how Lorraine had stolen a camera from his home a few weeks before her death. A camera, police speculated, that he may have used to take unauthorized photos of her children. In vivid detail, Richardson wrote about the day he had too much to drink after failing his exams, a night that spiraled into horror. He set out to meet some friends, likely prostitutes, though he kept this vague, perhaps to maintain some form of decorum despite confessing to murder. Later that evening, Richardson encountered Lorraine as she walked home, bags of chips in hand. An argument about the camera quickly escalated, and in a fit of rage, he strangled her. Though the crime wasn't sexually motivated, he removed her underwear, hoping to mislead investigators. He even stole her purse, containing a pawn ticket that he never redeemed. At the time of the murder, the case had stumped detectives, with over 100 officers working the investigation. Yet Richardson had never even been a suspect. It wasn't until his deathbed confession came to light that the truth was finally revealed. Number 9. Christopher Smith. In 1975, the murder of 26-year-old Joan Harrison shook Preston, England. Brutally attacked, her case was initially linked to the infamous Yorkshire Ripper, as the Ripper was known to target women in that area. Adding to the confusion, a taunting letter from a hoaxer, calling himself Wareside Jack, identified Harrison as one of the Ripper's victims. But in 1981, when the real Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, was finally apprehended, he confessed to 13 murders. Yet Joan Harrison was not among them. Wareside Jack's letter and recordings had been nothing more than a cruel hoax, and with that, the trail of evidence in Joan's murder went cold. Decades later, Christopher Smith, who was terminally ill with cancer, made a surprising confession. Recently arrested on a drunk driving charge, Smith's DNA was collected. And likely fearing that the truth was about to surface, he decided to clear his conscience. In a 3-page rambling letter, he confessed to Joan Harrison's murder, apologizing for his horrific crime. Detectives discovered the confession letter in his home after his DNA results returned, confirming his link to Joan's murder. By that time, however, Christopher Smith was already dead, taking his final breaths just as the truth emerged. Number 8. Vernon Seitz. When Vernon Seitz passed away in his Milwaukee home at the age of 62, he left behind secrets that would only come to light after his death. His psychiatrist, following Seitz's final request, informed police of a disturbing confession. Seitz had claimed involvement in the disappearance of 14-year-old Jacob Wetterling, as well as the murder of 2 other boys. Upon searching Seitz's home, police discovered unsettling items: child-related memorabilia, worn children's shoes, and a collection of newspaper clippings about Jacob's abduction. Seitz claimed that he had been abducted as a child and, according to his story, was coerced into harming Jacob Wetterling. Police investigated further, finding freshly poured cement in his basement and various items suggestive of an obsession with the case, but no evidence linking him directly to the crime. Years later, in 2015, the truth finally emerged when police arrested Daniel Heinrich during an unrelated investigation. Heinrich, like Seitz, kept items related to Jacob Wetterling's case, but Heinrich ultimately confessed, leading investigators to Jacob's remains. This time, police had found the true culprit. Number 7. James Brewer. In 2009, James Brewer lay in a hospital bed after suffering a stroke, convinced he was nearing the end. With a heavy conscience, he felt there was something he had to confess. Brewer asked the hospital staff to call the police, wanting to make things right before he passed. When officers arrived, Brewer confessed to a murder he had committed 30 years prior. He admitted that he had shot and killed a neighbor, a man he believed was trying to seduce his wife. After the crime, Brewer and his wife had fled to a different state, starting a new life under assumed names to leave the past behind. In his eagerness to clear his conscience, Brewer inadvertently implicated his wife as an accessory, which could have meant jail time for her. But, for Brewer, the priority was a clear conscience before meeting his maker. However, life had other plans. Brewer recovered from his stroke, only to be promptly charged with murder. Number 6. Michael Lee Wilson. In a chilling twist, Michael Lee Wilson made a startling confession just moments before his execution. Malcolm Scott and DeMarco Carpenter are innocent. Both men had spent 20 years behind bars, convicted for a murder that Wilson himself claimed responsibility for. At the time of their arrests, Scott and Carpenter were only 17 years old. The case centered around the tragic death of Karen Summers, who was fatally shot in a drive-by linked to gang rivalry between the Bloods and Crips. With no physical evidence, the convictions relied solely on 2 eyewitnesses, both of whom later recanted their testimonies. Wilson's involvement had been brushed aside. Just a day after the shooting, he had been caught with a gun matching the weapon used in the crime, and he drove a maroon Ford Taurus, the same vehicle seen fleeing the scene. Yet, he was not charged. 4 months later, he killed again in a convenience store robbery. Allegations surfaced that the eyewitnesses had been pressured by police to implicate Carpenter and Scott. One witness, who had also been shot in the drive-by, would have had his back to the shooter, making identification nearly impossible. Despite Wilson's final confession, it took another 2 years before the justice system caught up. Eventually, Scott and Carpenter's sentences were overturned, and they walked free, 20 years after being wrongfully convicted. Number 5. Larry Sherard. As Larry Sherard lay on his deathbed, he confided in his niece, revealing a secret he had kept hidden for years. He had committed 2 murders. In those final moments, he admitted to his niece that he had killed both men during a drug deal gone wrong, stating, "They screwed me on my drugs, and I screwed them." After Sherard passed away, his niece went to the police to report his confession. She recounted that one of the bodies had been found a year after the man's disappearance, hidden in a cave. Following Sherard's directions through his niece, police were able to locate the second burial site, where they discovered bone fragments confirming Sherard's story. With his final breath, Sherard left behind the truth, a grim revelation that only surfaced when his life was coming to an end. Number 4. Katherine Kette. In 1867, the small community of Dayton was shaken by the brutal murder of Christine Kette, found bludgeoned to death with an axe in her own home. Her mother, Katherine Kette, devastated and vocal in her grief, demanded justice, even calling on neighbors to lynch Christine's lover, whom she believed to be the killer. Several suspects were questioned, but none could be linked to the crime, and gradually the case faded from public memory. Except for Katherine, who seemed forever haunted. 17 years later, on her deathbed, Katherine called her remaining child to her side. She confessed to a secret that had weighed on her for years. In a fit of rage over Christine's late-night outings with her boyfriend, she had killed her own daughter. In her desperation to evade suspicion, she had worked to redirect blame onto Christine's lover and others in the community. Katherine, finally unburdened, instructed her son to keep her secret. But, unwilling to carry the weight of her crime, he revealed her confession to the newspapers and the police, finally bringing the truth of Christine's tragic death to light. Number 3. Roy Heath. Roy Heath, known for his connections with the notorious East End gangsters, the Cray twins, harbored a dark secret until his final days. In 2009, as he faced the last stages of terminal cancer, Heath confessed to police that he had murdered Mohammed Taqi 12 years prior. Taqi had disappeared without a trace, and although 2 men were initially arrested in connection with his disappearance, no one was ever charged, leaving the case unsolved. Heath revealed that he had buried Taqi's remains under his patio. Acting on this confession, police dug up Heath's garden, where they found Taqi's body wrapped in a duvet cover beneath a layer of concrete. Heath was formally arrested and charged with the murder, but with his declining health, authorities knew there was no chance of a trial. Less than 2 weeks later, Heath passed away, taking with him a lifetime of secrets, but leaving behind the truth of Taqi's tragic fate. Number 2. Mark Chopper. Red. Mark Chopper Red, one of Australia's most notorious gangsters, was well known for his violent past and larger-than-life persona. Famous for his autobiography, How to Shoot Friends and Influence People, Reed had spent 23 years in prison but had never been convicted of murder. In his book, he hinted at involvement in 19 murders, though many dismissed these claims as exaggeration. However, when Reed learned his liver cancer was terminal, he decided to clear up some of his claims. Over 16 days, in a series of interviews strained by his failing health, he confessed to 4 murders, 3 men he had shot, and a convicted child killer he had strangled in prison. Among his victims was Sidney Collins, the head of the Outlaws motorcycle gang, who had been missing for over a decade. According to Reed, Collins had turned him into the police after Reed shot him in the stomach over a money dispute. In true Chopper style, Reed saw this as petty and not something worth involving the police. The prison death of the child killer had long been ruled a suicide, but Red's confession suggested otherwise. Known for surviving intense violence himself, Red once requested a fellow inmate to cut off his ears to secure a move to the medical wing during a chaotic time in prison. Although police pledged to investigate Reed's leads on the Collins case, Reed left few details about the body's location, and by the time the documentary aired, he had passed away. To this day, Sidney Collins' remains have yet to be found. Number 1. The Unidentified Man. In 2015, an elderly man, 91 years old, entered a Canadian police station with a stunning confession. Diagnosed with terminal cancer, he felt compelled to reveal a dark secret he'd kept for nearly 70 years. He confessed to murdering a woman in London in 1946, just after the end of World War II. According to his story, the incident occurred after he and the woman argued over money outside the Blue Lagoon nightclub on Carnaby Street. In a fit of rage, he had pulled out a Russian World War II pistol, a grim souvenir, and shot her. He didn't remember her name, but after checking records with Scotland Yard, police provided him with photographs, and he was able to identify his victim, Margaret Cook, a 26-year-old woman whose death had been linked to a series of unsolved murders targeting women in post-war London. At the time of the murder, London police had chased a suspect, a man in a Burberry coat and a pork pie hat, through crowded streets, but he vanished, leaving the case unsolved for decades. It's unclear if this man was indeed the same person who confessed, but his detailed account left no doubt. Given his advanced age and terminal illness, Canadian authorities declined Britain's request for extradition, and his identity was never publicly revealed. Thank you for joining us on Odd Occasions. If these confessions left you as stunned as they did us, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime content that delves deep into the mysteries of the human psyche. Let us know in the comments which confession shocked you the most, or if you know of other surprising last-minute revelations. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes even the darkest secrets come to light in the final moments.